up Genesis 39. We're in the life of Joseph. The opening verses of 39, verse 1, Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. So the opening verse continues the story of Joseph that was begun in chapter 37. The story is interrupted in chapter 38 with that dark saga of Judah. The interruption is necessary to provide a contrast between Joseph and Judah and to give a link of the lineage of Judah to the Messiah. And so chapter 39 brings us right back to the point where chapter 37 ended with Joseph being sold as a slave to Potiphar in Egypt. And if you trace the details in the verses that we are given, then we know that the events of chapter 39 occupy the first 11 years that Joseph is in Egypt. I'll show it to you. Look in chapter 37, back up there, 37 and verse 2. These are the generations of Jacob, Joseph being 17 years old. So Joseph was 17 years old when they sold him into slavery. Go to chapter 41. Chapter 41 and verse 46. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He's 30 years old when he's promoted by Pharaoh. So that gives us 13 years from the time that he is sold into slavery to the time that he's promoted by Potiphar. Come back to chapter 41 and verse 1. In verse 1, it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river, and Joseph is left in prison for 2 years, forgotten by the chief butler. So his rise to prominence takes 13 years. 2 of those years are in prison. And so the events of chapter 39 covers 11 years. Now there are 4 circumstances in chapter 39 that Joseph finds himself in. The first one is he comes to Egypt as a slave sold to Potiphar, who is an officer in Pharaoh's army. The second situation or circumstance is he proves himself as a worthy servant. He is soon promoted by Potiphar to be in charge of all of his household. The third circumstance is the temptation by Potiphar's wife and her making a false accusation against him. And then the fourth circumstance is it ends with him sitting in prison under false pretenses. And when we study chapter 37, the obvious theme for me was the providence of God. None of the things that happened in chapter 37 was bad luck. God was providentially placing Joseph in a place where he later would promote him and would be able to use him in a powerful position. The destination was always the promotion in Egypt, and the pit and the prison were just stops along the way. They were not unnecessary stops. They were divine appointments in the molding of Joseph's character. And that providence could be seen along the way. But there is another character trait that you come to chapter 39 that seems to be emphasized in these events, and it is faithfulness. Faithfulness. That's what I see when I look at chapter 39. Now, when I say faithfulness, you're probably thinking, first of all, Joseph's faithfulness to God, and that is true. His trials did not embitter him. His success did not corrupt him. In every circumstance, Joseph was the same. He was unmoved by circumstances. And whatever is happening right now around the world should not affect our Christianity. Whatever the Democrats do, whatever the Republicans do, whatever city they burn down next, it should not have an effect on my walk with God. Faithfulness is not circumstantial. My faith should be zealously lived out in one situation as easily as another. So I'm talking about Joseph's faithfulness to God. Or you might think faithfulness, God's faithfulness to Joseph, and you would be true there as well. Because in chapter 37, there is no mention of God, but he's found all over in this chapter. In fact, look if you would in verse number 2, and we'll read these verses several times. But in verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. Verse 3, and his master saw that the Lord was with him. Look at the middle of verse 5. The Lord blessed the Egyptian's sake, or house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. Look at verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph. Look at the last part of verse 23. Because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. Now we would readily say that the Lord was with Joseph while he was prospering, but these verses tell us that he was with Joseph while he was in prison. Being in prison does not mean that the Lord abandoned him. So Joseph was faithful to God, and God was faithful to Joseph. You see that over and over in all of these situations in chapter 39. Now very quickly tonight, I want to just give you a survey of the 4 scenarios in chapter 39 and show you the character trait of faithfulness in this chapter. First of all, I want you to notice that Joseph is faithful in spite of problems. Look again in verse number 1. Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. So chapter 39 takes us back to chapter 37, shows us exactly how he got here. Joseph had been hated by his brothers, and they had plotted his death, and their hatred and their bitterness had a lot to do with his favored position in the family, and they despised him because he thought that he would be the head of the family. So they've taken him, they've stripped him of his coat, and they've thrown him into this pit, and they're trying to decide what to do with him, and these Ishmaelites come, and they sell him to the Ishmaelites as a slave. And then the Ishmaelites bring Joseph down to Egypt, and they sell him to Potiphar, who is an officer in Pharaoh's army. Now that's the facts of the case. That's what we know. But here's what the text never tells us. It doesn't tell us about any of the emotions that are going on. It doesn't tell us how Joseph was treated. It doesn't tell us how Joseph felt. It doesn't tell about any tears that Joseph might have cried, how often that he wept. All of that is left to the imagination of the reader. It just gives you the facts of the case. But what would it be like? What would it be like for a teenage boy to be captured by a foreign enemy, taken to a foreign country, sold as a slave, and to know that you'll never see him again, for him to know that he'd never see his family again, for him to lay awake at night on a filthy cot somewhere that nobody knows, and to realize that the brokenness of it is that your brothers put you there. Now the reality is you can't imagine it. You can't visualize that. But that's what's happened to Joseph. And to add to the complexity, remember that it is his dreams that have put him here. Those dreams that he had in chapter 37 are still in his heart because those dreams had come from God. And he believed that those dreams were a revelation from God. This was something that God had told him. This is something that would take place one day. And he believed that his father and his brothers would be excited because of the revelation of God. And they weren't excited. He thought that they would rejoice with him over him being chosen to be in that exalted position. But he is here because of those dreams. Those dreams which held so much promise for him have actually become the source of all of his problems. And you have to wonder if there's not a lot of doubt in Joseph's heart. Could it be that those dreams are going to come to naught? Could it be that I totally was mistaken about the will of God? And in his wildest imagination, he would never dream this. And those doubts and those fears attacked his faith. But it couldn't destroy his faith. Because we read over and over that the Lord was with him, and the Lord prospered him. And his master knew that Joseph had the favor of God on him. And he never responds in anger. He never responds in bitterness. He never responds in compromise. And at some point in your life, you will face situations that cannot be described. Whether it be the death of a spouse or the betrayal of a best friend, the loss of a job. But again, Christianity is not circumstantial. We don't get up every morning and check the news to see if I'm going to have any joy or victory today. The world can burn down around us and we can still be victorious and faithful. Faithful in spite of whatever problems come our way. And Joseph was faithful in Egypt because he had faith before he was brought to Egypt. If you will have strong faith before the trouble comes, then it will sustain you when the trouble comes. The only way to be fruitful in the land of affliction is to be faithful in the land of tranquility. He's faithful in spite of problems. But then secondly, he's faithful in spite of prosperity. Look at verse 3. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him. He made him overseer over his house and all that he had put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. Now, given what has transpired in Joseph's life up to this point, it's really astounding to read what happens next. Joseph was a shepherd, so it is probable that he started out in the fields, working with the other shepherds and watching the flocks. But Potiphar noticed his work ethic and the strong spirit and the good attitude of Joseph. And maybe he heard reports from those that worked with Joseph, but Joseph came to his attention. And so it's not long before Joseph is brought into the house to become a personal steward of Potiphar and his wife. And Joseph continued to excel, and he showed wisdom and understanding, and it's evident that he is above the others. And Joseph kept getting promoted and getting promoted more and more and more. And the more responsibility he's given, the more that he prospered. And then Potiphar noticed how unusually different Joseph was. And soon he placed all of his business under Joseph. And that meant that in the household of Joseph, Potiphar, Joseph is second in command. And there are two statements that are found side by side over and over. In verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. Verse 3, the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Verse 21, the Lord was with Joseph and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Verse 23, the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. Those two statements are always connected. The Lord was with Joseph and blessed everything that he did, and those blessings spilled over into Potiphar's household. Now, there's several applications we could make. One of them is we could go back to Genesis chapter 12, where God promised Abraham that his seed would be a blessing to all the nations. The Jewish race would be a blessing to the nations. God promised Abraham that his people would be a blessing to a nation. That's exactly what is happening here. A Hebrew in the house made things better for Potiphar's house. I believe one of the reasons why God has blessed America so is because we have been a friend to Israel. I believe that God's favor on that nation has spilled over onto our nation. But the reality is that ought to be the testimony of Christians and the church in America. Hold your finger right here. Go to Proverbs 29. Proverbs 29, and look at a couple of statements here. Proverbs chapter 29, look if you would in verse number 2. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. Go turn on the news and see what city they're burning tonight. That verse right there will take care of it. Look in Proverbs 11. Proverbs chapter number 11 and verse number 10. When it goeth well with the righteous, the city rejoiceth. And when the wicked perish, there is shouting. I'm going to tell you, that would work for San Francisco and Portland and Chicago and Detroit. All of these cities where all the rioting and looting is taken on. I'm going to tell you something. If you put Bible-believing Christians in every position of government in those cities, I'll have to clean that mess up in about a year. You go visit a country that has a strong Christian influence and go visit a country that has a strong Muslim influence and see the difference. Because God blesses his people and those blessings spill over onto other people. And what is remarkable about Joseph is that his prosperity did not corrupt his faith in God. Some people can't handle problems, they just fall apart. But some people can't handle prosperity because it draws their heart away from God. You're here in Proverbs. Look at Proverbs 30. Proverbs 30. Boy, this is a great verse. Proverbs 30. And look at verse number 7. Proverbs 30 and verse 7. 2 things have I required of thee. Deny me them not before I die. Here's the first one. Remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient for me. Lord, don't make me so poor that I lose heart, but don't make me so rich that I forget God. You just give me enough to meet my needs. Well, we don't pray that very often, do we? Huh? But because success can become an entanglement. Prosperity can be as much your downfall as success. Prosperity and material wealth, it will expose what is in your heart quicker than anything else. And if God has blessed you, keep your eyes on the blesser and not the blessing. Joseph is faithful in spite of prosperity. Come back to Genesis 39. He's faithful in spite of problems. He's faithful in spite of prosperity. Joseph is faithful in spite of pressure. Look at verse number 7. It came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house. He hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? It came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she called him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. You look at each experience of Joseph as a new test. If that's the case, this is the hardest test yet. The temptation is a loose woman who tries to seduce him to lie with her. Potiphar's wife is the woman of Proverbs chapter 7, the seductress who uses her charms and her wiles and her flattery to try to get Joseph to have an affair. And only a man would understand the kind of pressure, the temptation that is. A young man, first of all, would be flattered by the attention of this woman. I'm reading between the lines. I have no idea what she looked like. But for it to be a legitimate temptation, need I say more? She had to have some womanly charms to her. She's vulgar in her words. She's vulgar in her ways. She probably, I can only guess what she said, how she dressed, the way that she flirted. And in verse 10, it came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day, not just a one-time thing. The Bible says that she set her eyes on him and she pursued him. And I'm being careful with my language here because I think you can imagine what's happening. But she threw herself at him every time that he came around. And he probably tried to avoid her, but in his position, he couldn't always do that. Being his master's wife, and she could arrange to have him close by. And perhaps she began with a suggestion, and then she moved to making demands. And when she couldn't entice him, she perhaps began to threaten him. And I know that she's diabolical because she eventually falsely accuses him and has him put into prison. And Proverbs 7 paints the portrait of a seductress. It's a chapter that every young man and woman ought to study to find out how temptation works. And we live in such a sex-saturated society, and children and teenagers are bombarded with images and innuendos from everywhere. It is a battle for young men and women to have a pure mind in an X-rated world. And if you want an example of what temptation looks like and how to resist temptation, there's no better example than Joseph. He is faithful in spite of the pressure. There's a couple of things about his response, and I'll close with this. But his response is decisive. Look at verse number 8. But he refused. It's pretty adamant. She is not subtle in her advances. He is not subtle in his denial. He never entertained the notion of lying with her. He didn't have any struggle in his mind because he's already settled purity in his heart. There are simply some things I'm not going to look at. There are some places I am not going to go. He doesn't leave the door open. He doesn't play coy. He doesn't act like he's interested. No. He refused. It's pretty decisive. But his response is principled. Verse 9. Here's why. He said, there's none greater in this house than I. Neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? The reason I'm not entertaining this is because it is sin. And he lets her know up front. It is a matter of right and wrong and nothing else. It is not because I'm afraid we'll get caught. It is not because I'm afraid of the consequences. No, no, it is a sin against God. I would be defrauding my master Potiphar, but more importantly, I am betraying my God. No, it's a sin. It's principle. His response is unyielding again in verse 10. It came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day. He made the decision in his heart on the first day, but he's got to ratify that decision in his heart every day. And you may win a victory today, but it doesn't mean that you won't battle the same battle tomorrow. The flesh doesn't die easy. I tell you that you don't grow out of temptation with age. Yielding yourself to God and dying to self, it is a day by day exercise. In fact, look at verse 10 again. It came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not to her, to lie by her, watch this, or to be with her. Again, I'm being careful with my language. He's not going to go to bed with her. I'm not even going to be near her if I don't have to be. I'm not going to place myself in a vulnerable position. I'm not going to be there. The best way to resist temptation is to run away from it. You can't play with fire and not get burnt. I think I've told you this story here. I don't know. It just comes to mind. We used to have a woman here in our church years and years ago. Wouldn't be two people would even know her name if I called her name. And right now I can't even remember her name. We used to have a woman in our church. And her and her husband was here. And I think they were having some marital problems or something. I don't know what it was. And so she come up to me one Sunday after service. Pastor, I'd like to sit down and talk with you sometime. And I said, sure. I said, call in the office in the morning. We'll make an appointment. My wife and I'll come see you. I don't ever counsel women by myself. Never. And so the next morning, I came to the office in the morning. She knew what time I came, and she was there. She was waiting for me. So here I am in the office. It's me and her. We're by ourselves. And she sat down in my office, wanted to talk to me about her marriage. Well, that's a little uncomfortable situation. I care for that. And so we tried to get out of it as quick as we could, talked to her a little bit, and she left. And so next Sunday, same thing. I just need to come in the morning and sit down and talk to you. And I said, you call the secretary, and you make an appointment. My wife and I come see you. Monday morning I came to the office, she was there. And it just happened a couple times. She's not listening. She doesn't. So third Sunday, she met me in the foyer. I need to talk to you. Well, there's too much talking. Okay, too much counseling here. And so I was very pointed with her. And I said, I'm not going to meet with you privately. My wife and I will meet with you. And we will talk with you. But it would be my wife and I. Do not come to my office. Do not meet me there alone. It would be my wife. And I was very, rude. You know, it was the last time she ever walked in this church building. Last time. Now, I flatter myself to think that she wanted to do anything. I don't know. Whatever. But I'm not going to be in that position. I'm going to be there. His response was unyielding. His response was drastic. So drastic. Look at verse 12. She caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me, and he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. Better to lose my coat than my character. And the Bible says, flee fornication. Flee fornication. Joseph is not going to hang around to see how strong he is, to see if I can resist this. He knows that he's not strong. I am going to put as much distance between myself and this woman as I possibly can. If a man is not willing to take drastic measures to overcome temptation and to stay pure, he doesn't value purity enough. So I had a man come to the office one time. His wife drug him in, and she caught him in pornography. And he had a laptop or something, and he was pulling up pornography on his computer and been doing it for a while. And so I talked to him, and he boo-hooed and cried around and what have you. And I said, well, tell you what you need to do. You're pulling up the pornography computer. He said, that's right. I said, all right. I said, well, you need to get rid of the computer. So that'd be the first thing you do. Just need to get rid. Well, I can't do that. I have to have the computer for my work. Not a problem. Get another job. You'll have to get rid of that job. Get another job. What I can't do. You don't want to get rid of it. You don't want to quit. You're not willing to take that. Now, some of y'all thinking that's drastic. By the way, she drug him in another 6 months down the road. Come in three times. Yeah? You're not willing to take whatever drastic steps are necessary to get rid of the temptation. Not willing. And Joseph has faced great pressure as a young man, the strongest temptation known to many men, and yet he remained faithful. Now, the pressure against you may be something completely different. It may be pressure to compromise your convictions, or to bow to peer pressure, or to soften your stance on some conviction. But what matters is, will you be faithful in the end? And the Bible places a high premium on faithfulness. A faithful witness who will not lie. Many men will proclaim everyone his own goodness, but a faithful man who can find. And being faithful doesn't exempt you from trials and testings and troubles. In fact, you won't know if you are faithful until you have been tested. It is only when your faith is tested, then you find out what kind of faith that you really have. And you won't know if you'll crack under pressure until there is some pressure put on you. Can you say you're a faithful man? You're a faithful woman. There's one other situation. I'll deal with it next week. He's faithful even in prison. Even in prison. We'll deal with that next week. Heavenly Father, I pray that you take this message tonight and these words on the life of Joseph and encourage our hearts tonight, encourage our young people, Lord, to be faithful to you, faithful to our convictions, faithful to our faith, faithful to our God. Encourage our hearts tonight, I pray in Jesus' name, and amen.